Hi, I just thought I'd make a quick video just because there's a little bit of confusion around the policing bill protest tomorrow on our Liberation Day, and I thought it might just be helpful just to explain a little bit about it and why it's relevant to us. So, a bill is a proposition for legislation. So, if it gets through its stages in Parliament, what it means is that it goes into the law books and becomes the law. So the policing bill that they're proposing, which has already gone through its first two stages, in effect will outlaw any protest that the government deems as a nuisance or as an annoyance. And that's the terminology that they've used. Um, so people might be thinking, well, what's that got to do with us as, living in Jersey? Well, there's a number of reasons. Firstly, because we know that Jersey tends to follow suit with the UK. Whatever legislation they take up, we tend to adopt in time as well. Secondly, we know that our most senior civil servants get recruited almost exclusively from the UK and thus will bring that culture and attitude with them. Thirdly, there's lots of islanders that travel to the UK to take part in protests and actions, whether it's about the environment, whether it's about human rights, it could be about anything, maybe in the future about COVID restrictions, who knows. This is something that will affect people across the political spectrum, no matter what their outlook. Protest is something that's important for all of us, or the right to protest. The other thing is we know that we have lots of students that travel or go and study in the UK, and you might have a situation where their rents for their student accommodation are hiked up and they want to organise a protest to raise awareness about it and demand the landlords not put their rental rates above inflation or something like that, which has happened previously. So these are things that will affect islanders. Now, the one of the suggestions within or propositions within the bill is that anyone attending or taking part or organising these types of protests could see a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison, which is terrifying. This is a fundamental right that we have, and it just seems important that on the day we celebrate our liberation and we remember the important sacrifices that our grandparents made so we had freedoms, that we take the time to really focus on what those freedoms that they fought for are and were, and ensure that those freedoms are protected so that we don't forget what that sacrifice is and make a mockery of that sacrifice. It's so important. Now, the reason why this bill is important as well, or something for us to be aware of, is because we're seeing more and more concerning legislation going into the UK books. In March, a bill was passed. It's become law now, called the Spy Cops Bill, or it's called its formal title is the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Bill, and in effect that means that undercover police officers or intelligence services or any other kind of security services who go undercover are able to commit any crime without any caveats. Anything with no checks or balances. That includes torture, murder, rape, anything that you can imagine. There has been nothing put in place to stop them from committing those crimes. And whereas previously it was in respect of national security, now the law gives permission for these things to happen in order to prevent harm to the UK economy or to prevent a public disorder. Now that's really vague language, which obviously means it's open to abuse, but also whereas in the past you'd have to have high-ranking officials or the most senior officials write stuff like or sign stuff like that off, now it just has to be their reporting officer, which is really concerning. And reports that have come out about how spy cops have been used in the past demonstrate that I think there was like over 1,000 different groups were infiltrated. Five of them, I was mistaken the first time I said three, but it's actually five were far right groups. The rest of the groups, which were hundreds, were human rights groups, environment groups, animal rights groups. So all groups that are publicly set up, that were legal groups, and they were the groups that were infiltrated. And I'm not going to go on too much about what Spy Cops is, because you can look that up. And also, if you read my article, well, the letter that I wrote about it, I did attach a number of references that people can look up and check. So this is why we've got the protest tomorrow, because, you know, the Spy Cops has already passed. There's not much we can do about that. But what the policing bill would do was, say, for instance, someone we know, someone we love, someone we care about becomes a victim of a Spy Cop. So say, for instance, you have a union, union organisers organising a general strike about working conditions or about wages or about anything else. In effect, an undercover officer could murder them or torture them or rape them, and you wouldn't even be allowed to protest it. That's what the policing bill would be. You know, the Spy Cops means that they can legally do that, but the policing bill would mean that you couldn't protest it and demand accountability. So this is why the bill is so important, for it to be condemned and rejected by our government. This is why it's so important that our government publicly states that it has no intention of adopting similar legislation here. But it is about protecting our fundamental rights as human beings. Now, we know historically that none of our rights were gained without protest, whether it's women's votes. In fact, working class men didn't get the right to vote until they protest. We know whether it's the civil rights movements or all these other things, the rights that we've gained have only ever been achieved through the right to protest. And yes, for some people it may be an annoyance, it may be a nuisance, but the reality is that there are far more dangerous things than people being annoyed or finding something a nuisance. We have the right as ordinary human beings to have our rights respected. We have the right to demand better of our government. And this is why it's so important for us to really stand up and demand that our government condemns this bill. Anyway, I hope that that's helpful. And any questions, let me know. And hopefully I'll see some of you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.